Well, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started here, folks. Before we welcome our presenter, just want to give you a few announcements. My name is Caroline. I am the Nature Center Director at Chik-Wauk. This is my third season here, so it's nice to see some familiar faces here in the Nature Center today. A couple announcements. We have some other events happening at Chik-Wauk in the next week, actually. We have our grand opening of our new exhibit. That will be on Saturday. So our new exhibit, if you haven't checked it out, it's in the museum. It's Zagandaga Anishinaabe. That's the People of the Thick Coniferous Forest exhibit, focusing on Anishinaabe or Ojibwe history. So we're ready to celebrate that. That will be happening on Saturday, 2 to 4. We do have a presentation or a program, I should say, starting at 3 o'clock. And we will have food and refreshments for you if you care to join us. So again, that'll be Saturday, 2 to 4, program starts at 3. So if you would love to have you there, if you're interested in joining. And then on Sunday next week, we have our next presenter. That'll be Sammy. She'll be sharing with us all about moose next week. And that's on Sunday at 2 o'clock in the Nature Center, just where you are right now. So. Yeah, anyway, we have other very exciting things. If you're interested, you can check our calendar on our website to find out more. But I will stop telling you about what's happening in the future, because today we have Kyle joining us. He's a moth expert. He's been studying moths for over 3 decades and is currently working with the Minnesota Biological Survey. And I'm very excited to learn all about moths with him today. So why don't you join me in welcoming him?
Thanks for having me. This is a gorgeous venue. I've never been up here before. I actually did moth sampling at Seagull Lake in 2006, and it looks a bit different now. So it's good to be back up. Just to get a little sense of the audience here, how many of you, I presume most of you, have some like of natural history? I'd be sad if you don't. You're probably in the wrong room. How many of you have done a little dabbling on your own with moths and butterflies? Maybe you have a book or have looked up a few species. Or all right. How many of you are really gung-ho and have been studying them for quite some time? Oh, we got one hand there. Oh, exciting, exciting. So hopefully there'll be a little something of interest for everyone today. So yeah, I'm Kyle Johnson. I work with the Minnesota DNR's Minnesota Biological Survey. Are any of you familiar with that program? A few of you. So a gung-ho group of biologists. We're out there documenting life across the state. Emphasis on rare species, but it's important to document everything out there. And that's what we do. So today I'm going to talk about moths. So we'll start off with, what are moths? Probably have some idea. And why do they matter? Why should we care about them? And then a brief tour of Minnesota's moth diversity, just to give you a sense of the size and shape and form our moths come in. We'll follow with a brief bit about moth identification, then how to find moths. I'll talk a little bit about my work with the Minnesota Biological Survey, and then end with conservation concerns and actions, and hopefully time for questions. So think of them as we go along, and don't be shy about, if something comes to mind in the middle of the presentation, just raise your hand. And at the end, I'll gauge. We might do a field trip here tonight if there's interest. So we'll talk more about that later. So to start with, well, what are moths? So actually, I'll back up there. Anyone want to guess what the difference is between moths and butterflies? That's a question everyone's asking. And I'll give you a hint. My take on it, it's a trick question. So, anyone want to take a stab?
Mostly diurnal versus nocturnal.
It's pretty good. So yeah, most butterflies are indeed nocturnal, and most of what people would call moths are nocturnal. Anything else?
Moths have usually pretty good antenna size compared to butterflies.
Okay, you're thinking of the feathery antenna.
Yeah.
Okay, that's something butterflies do not have, and moths certainly can have that.
Different ways of eating. Moths, a lot of them strike me as
eating a lot of plants, and even to the level of becoming pests, whereas butterflies less likely.
Okay, well, there certainly are some moths that, when they have outbreaks, can, well, in some cases, like up here, you have a native species, the forest tent moth, that can strip the forest of leaves. Or if you have gardens, you probably would be fearful of tomato hornworms if you were further south in Minnesota. There's just a whole host of things that can go after your garden. Butterflies, cabbage white would be one that would go after gardens. They're here in Cook County, but not as common. But most species are pretty benign. So I'm going to take a twist on that and say butterflies are moths. Yeah, so it's just in the same way that owls are birds. From a scientific point of view, moths would be the order, oops, there's a slide in there. The order Lepidoptera, you may have heard that term before, means scale wings. So they do stand out from other insects in that the wings of the adult are covered in scales. So they have a complete metamorphosis. These are all different species, by the way. Egg to caterpillar, the eating machine, pupa, and the adult. So the order Lepidoptera, it's not divided into moths and butterflies from the scientific standpoint. It's a primitive group of moths and then the rest. And then that group is divided into another primitive group of moths and the rest. Butterflies are deeply embedded. So from a scientific point of view, it isn't divided that way, so it's pretty analogous to owls. You wouldn't say owls and then all other birds in one group. It would be kind of strange. It's just from a convenience standpoint, butterflies are a particular group of moths that are generally colorful, easy to pay attention to. They fly during the day. Things that are out at night are a lot harder to study and observe, so we separate them out and we call them butterflies. But just know that they are, in fact, a group of moths. So, and they do come in quite the range of shapes, sizes, and colors. And down from teeny tiny ones, this one is smaller than a grain of rice. I bet you all have it in the vicinity of your backyard. These are case bearer moths. They form a little case on clover. To inchworm moths and owlet moths, very different shapes, and then, yes, the group of moths known as butterflies. So, why should we care about moths? Why are they important?
Some depend upon moths specifically for reproduction, pollen, to pollinate.
Pollinators, very important group of pollinators. Excellent. Anything else?
Warbler food.
Food, those are the two big things. So we'll start with biomass. There's more weight in caterpillars out there than there would be deer and the other large mammals when you put them together. Now that hasn't been studied in Minnesota, but insect studies on, say, the African savannas, where you have the herds of wildebeest and such, the insects are still the dominant biomass when you consider the whole landscape. Obviously, right where a herd is standing, they're going to outweigh everything, but think of what's the largest animal on Earth? Blue whale. What does it eat? Tiny relative to the size of the blue whale, but you can't weigh more than you eat. So it's generally the smaller creatures in the ecosystem collectively are the dominant parts. And who knows, a bacteria, if we could weigh them, that would probably be truly staggering. So you may see caterpillars just out eating, but sometimes you don't see the caterpillar directly, but you might see signs. Haven't you seen an alder or a birch leaf rolled up like that? It's a caterpillar inside there. These are probably outside on the property here somewhere. Crazy squiggly lines. That's a caterpillar eating its way through the leaf, so what comes out must be pretty small. Right now, I know there's some of these mines out in the forest around here, and then there's also these blotches. That's another type of caterpillar in there. Just billions of them along the leaf, literally billions. Some are inside a stem, so all the eating they do, it may not be obvious at any given moment, but they are out there, and they're in a lot of different circumstances. Yes, and of course, food for many creatures, from warblers and birds up to grizzly bears, particularly in like the Rocky Mountains. You may have seen documentaries about they'll go and paw through rocks, actually put on weight eating moths, down to insects and spiders and other invertebrates, so they are an important part of the food chain. And yes, pollinators, very important pollinators. So how many have looked at flowers during the day for pollinating insects? Okay, most of you. How many of you have looked at those flowers at night? One. Check those flowers after dark, folks. Pollination does not stop after the sun goes down. So here's one on fireweed. This is a very common moth in northern Minnesota. There could be some pretty showy things out there. This is on milkweed flowers. I actually saw one of these last night up the Sawbill Trail, but it's throughout much of Minnesota. So if you got milkweeds in July, maybe into August, but July is a really good month, you might have this. So here I just want to give you a brief tour of moth diversity across Minnesota. And the point is you're not going to remember names or anything like that. I'll have the scientific names up for anyone that's interested. But just to give you an idea of the shape and size and colors that they come in. And hopefully you'll leave here not thinking that, well, Minnesota moths are just all brown. And even the ones that are brown are pretty cool looking. Just like a lot of birds, if you saw them at a distance, it's a brown blob. If you see that owl up close, really cool patterns. It looks awesome. So before we dive in, though, let's take a guess at how many species. And some of the Nature Center folks might think they have a cheat sheet, but that's also based on, we have a lot of information since then. Anyone want to guess? Let's start with how many species of moths do you think occur in all of Minnesota? And that includes the butterflies. The non-butterfly moths are the bulk.
1,500.
1,500, excellent guess.
I was going to guess 2,000.
Okay. All right, my personal total of what I've caught and identified is over 2,100. A low-end estimate would be about 2,500. I think if we did enough work and could get all the cryptic species, and I think 3,000 is a reasonable total to shoot for. Anyone want to guess? All right, take one diverse area. Let's just say, the Seagull Lake, Saginaw Lake area, or just any diverse landscape, and you sample it long enough. How many of these species do you think you'd find? Let's say you did decades and decades worth of effort. So we know, let's just say 2,500 is a low-end estimate for the entire state. How many do you think you could find in a single area?
300.
300. Good guess.
500.
500. Closest without going over.
1,000.
1,000. So my best sampled site in Minnesota is Norris Camp up in Lake of the Woods County. Very nice wild place, very boreal ecosystem there. I'm over 1,100 and adding new things all the time. Have a lot of things to work on. I've got a colleague in East Central Wisconsin that has one area with decades of work. 1,600 species. Now that's a very diverse area, and you're getting into hickory and oak and just a lot of other plant diversity. And then I have a colleague in Ontario that decades of sampling and access to the Barcode of Life project's DNA lab at University of Guelph. So a lot of these unknown species, you can at least get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and start counting those. 2,300 plus. So it's just truly amazing what's out there. It's like, well, that's more than I've got in Minnesota. But yeah, the point is you will never run out of new things to find with a group like moths. So coming up with the 2,100 plus for Minnesota, this is just a sampling of places I've personally been to. This is zoom in on the Great Lakes region, so there's a few not mapped there, but it's reasonable coverage, I think, but a lot less in the prairie region. You can tell I definitely like the North Woods.
Question?
Oh, sure.
How many have you seen in Isle Royale?
I did 2 trips there. I think I was about 200 or maybe close to that, but that's again backpacking with gear and it's not a full-out effort. That's just scratching the surface.
Okay.
So the Isle Royale was fun. So there's my current total. So yeah, Minnesota 2,143, and that's what's databases. A whole bunch of stuff I need to get to that's going to really make that total jump. And it's kind of a county by county look. So Cook County, when I initially, in 2009 is when I did most of my efforts, like, oh, over 500, that felt pretty good. And then years later, it's like, oh, it's not feeling like so many anymore. So I think it's time to spend more time back in Cook County. Lake of the Woods County there is in the northwest. That's the place I spent a lot of time since 2007, off and on. And that county, I'm right on the edge of 1,300 species, and then one site, Norris Camp, over 1,100, as I said. And a very boreal, landscape.
Is there a pattern in terms of numbers increasing, decreasing with latitude or longitude?
Well, there are, you're just saying, in general,
General Great Lakes.
yeah, it's you'd think north is less diverse than south, but it really depends on the habitat makeup, and what I'm finding is some places in the north are quite diverse. I still think probably the southeast part of Minnesota is going to end up being the most diverse, but it's not by a huge margin. So the prairies seem to be the least diverse, but it's hard to judge because it's also mostly agriculture, and the preserves are quite small. But the plains overall has less diversity, but a higher concentration of rare species because prairies are rare, right? So now we'll take that brief tour of moth diversity. So you can think of moths in three basic groups. So butterflies is a group you already know. But on the primitive end, and by primitive in terms of like an evolutionary sense, they're called microbes or micromoths because they tend to be small. There are exceptions. There are some pretty big ones, but most of them tend to be really small. The one figured is smaller than a grain of rice. And then the macros on the bottom, they tend to be larger. There are exceptions though. Some can be pretty small, but some can be the size of a bat. So all of them. So this is now just a brief visual tour to give you a sense of, again, don't worry about the names, you're not going to be able to identify them, but just appreciate the color and form and diversity. So this is one of those small ones, but you look at it up close, and just the pattern, it just looks like something gaudy and tropical. But this is wherever you have scrubby oaks in Minnesota. This is an exception to that micro moths being small, but ghost moths can be quite huge. This one's about 4 inches across, so not micro by any stretch of the imagination. Try Willowcatkins in the spring, you might see these. So-called fairy moths, very long and teddy. And here's one of many groups of moths that make mines in leaves. So again, think of a caterpillar inside a leaf, and what comes out is teeny, teeny, tiny. And this is in the clothes moth family, which they have some odd diets, like animal nests and hides, but there are some species that have adapted to eating human clothes. And this family has all kinds of leaf miners. I bet this is out. This moth rolls all their leaves. I bet it's right around here. And here's one that would be on dogwoods and bunchberry. And this will be on Labrador tea. So these are probably all things that occur not too far. But again, tiny, and the adults fly at night. Most people would never see that. Another group of moths, Ipsilophids. We've got a lot of YP words out there. Here's one of my favorites. This one would be on cotton grass seed heads in the day and bogs. And there's that one up close. Now we're getting into a group, in Europe they call these the flat-bodied moths. Some of them may hide under tree bark in the winter, so if you know where to look, even on January 1st, you can go out and look for moths. And some pretty colorful ones.
So are these all pictures you've taken?
Yes, all the pictures in this presentation.
Okay.
Again, just all the shapes and size and colors. So I think I probably already convinced you that they're not all just plain brown. And some I have no idea what they are because they're groups that are difficult to identify. And maybe I'll figure this one out. Maybe it'll be a new species. Who knows? This is a group that's notorious for gazillions of new species that would, perhaps help us if we knew all of them get towards that 3,000 instead of 2,500 total.
Do they all feed as adults?
Not all of them do. So Luna moth would be a famous example of one that doesn't. They don't have functioning mouth parts, but most of them presumably can. We don't know for sure. We've never observed it for most species, but As we said before, a lot of them important pollinators, so they'll be on various flowers. It could be other sweet substances like sap flows. Some could be on carrion or down or other odd things. So, but yeah, most of them can feed in one manner or another.
Okay.
As adults, of course, the caterpillar is the eating machine. So, like this family, Streckensteinidae, presumably it's a hybrid between Shrek and Frankenstein. This is part of a group of moths that are wasp mimics. Some are more waspy-like than others. This one really looks like a yellow jacket when it's hovering around. The pterophora or plume moths, they look like the letter T when they sit. And with the wings stretched out, pretty odd that the wing is broken into different lobes, but not nearly as extreme as this one. And this is one that would be, I saw one up the Sawville Trail a few nights ago, so presumably they would be out around here now, just difficult to encounter. And again, very small. All these microscope images, the moth is only like, we're talking itty bitty. Some have interesting textures. You can see the scales are curved upwards on that, helps them hide in with tree bark and lichens and things. And for those just arriving, this is just a brief tour of just the shapes and sizes and colors of moths we have in Minnesota. And just when you think there aren't more pattern possibilities. Now we're getting into a little bit larger, into the slug moths. Some of these have pretty crazy caterpillars that have poisonous spines. And now we're getting into the group of moths people call butterflies. So that first section, that gives you a little sense of those micro moths, the moths that most people never pay attention to because they're so small. Actually, I think they're the prettiest of all our moths. Just crazy, crazy shapes, quite a range in size, although again, most are small. And colors are just, metallic colors to very vivid ones. Yes?
Is the sort of like hairy hind wing in these microliths, is that pretty widespread?
Oh yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So you see here, what looks like a bird feather, those are elongated scales. So I mentioned the wings are covered with scales. On the butterflies, see how short that is, but you can see right here, this is called the fringe, and these elongated scales on the edge. But relative to the whole wing, that's not very big. With the micro moths, they're so small that the air is more like a fluid. So think of a dandelion seed floating through the air. You don't, if you had a solid wing surface, it's actually kind of hard to flap your wings, so less air resistance that way. So a lot of the teeny tiny moths tend to have wings of that nature. This one might be in cranberries in Cook County, pretty localized. There's another, I remember finding this one in 2006 in one of the bogs just around Seagull Creek. So.
Oh, wow.
And then this one would be in black spruce swamps and tree bogs, so that one's also in the Seagull Lake area. And now we're moving on, so that was just, notice I didn't show that many because butterflies, there's not a lot of species relative to the rest of moths. So then the last part, the macro moths, will just give you a little sense of that, starting with called pyralids, which include species like the Indian meal moth that might get in your pantry. So there's a few pest species here, but again, only a very tiny fraction of species actually are problematic for humans. This was a neat one. It bores into cacti in southwestern Minnesota. I mentioned pollinating at night again. Snout moths is a good common name for this group. Notice it's an extension of the mouth parts, but it kind of looks like they have a long snoot. And some can be, again, pretty showy. Now we're moving into called the hook-tip moths, and this would be a common one around here. This one's almost like a fuzzy puppy. There, I think everyone knows that one, right? So that's probably the most distinctive moth we have. It's another giant one. This would be in oak areas of Minnesota. There's quite a few sphinx moths. Now this one would be in more southern and western Minnesota, but there's other ones kind of like it up here. This would be very common wherever you have willows, so this would be actually abundant in this area.
What did you say, wherever you have one?
Willows.
Willow.
Yep, so pretty much anywhere in Cook County you're going to find that species, assuming that the conditions are right and they're all flying. So the inchworm moths, a lot of them, notice they hold their wings kind of like butterflies. And they're actually more closely related to butterflies than they are certain groups of moths, like much closer to butterflies than they are to micro moths. You might have that in your yard, chickweed down there. And some nice greens. Blends in with lichen. That's a very common moth in coniferous forests. So again, that would be right here if we're late May into June. And this one's out right now, just starting.
These are common names?
So that's a good point. So I have the scientific name in the top left, like the Luna moth. I have the common name. Common names have not been well established for most moths. Now the new Peterson Field Guide to Moths includes common names. They're more recent inventions, so they're not established in the same way like bird names, but as they settle in, I'll eventually add that. The point here is don't worry about the name so much as just the diversity of shape and size and color. But yeah, the Peterson Guide and then certain online resources, which I'll mention a bit, like Bug Guide and such, they'll include common names. Just realize that most of them are fairly recent inventions and not well established. Yeah, so where butterflies have always had. Yes?
Are the geometras the main moth that is in oak as the leaves emerge and grows and the rows, spiders,
Well, they can be, I mean, they're very abundant in terms of biomass, so it'd be between those and then the last group of moths we'll be getting to. But that would be a significant part.
Okay.
Now we're getting to the superfamily of the most advanced moths. So this would be a smaller family within that. They're called the prominents. A lot of big, fuzzy, cool hairdos. And the tiger moths, you may have heard that term before, which includes quite a few species.
Wow.
That's one that's up here in northern Minnesota. And now this is a group that caterpillars eat dead leaves. And some weird shapes again. This is a group, the underwing moths, that the front wings look like bark and the hind wings have different bright colors. And they're quite large, from 2 to 4 inches across. We have one very similar to that occurs here right now. If bait would work tonight, they might be out. It was kind of rough on the sawbillies. When it gets really cold at night, they tend not to feed as much. But yeah, there are species that look like this that are out right now in Cook County.
Briseis?
What's that?
Briseis? Is that what it's called?
Briseis is one of them. That's Cara. I was thinking there's one called Concumbens, the pink underwing, like it's a bubblegum pink. So it looks like.
I got a picture of Briseis this morning. So.
Oh, nice, cool. And the Millwoods are kind of an odd group of moths, not a lot of species. And then the last family, this is the most advanced family, the Noctuids, the owlet moths. And again, a lot of your more typical moth shapes would be in here, but some of them are pretty showy. So blueberry feeding one. I love these in the spring. They blend with the lichens nicely. This one would be here at the Nature Center, presumably.
Joker?
Yep. And this includes a lot of prairie species. Euxilias are called. Sallows is a common name for them. I found them every month of the year in the Midwest except for July. They come out sometimes in very late August or September, and then they fly, they survive the winter, and they can be active on winter thaws. Now, Cook County would be a lot harder, but I live in northeast Wisconsin, and still fairly boreal, and during January thaws, I have gotten them in my yard.
What function does it serve the ones with the very furry heads?
Well, the scales, it breaks up their outline and, makes them harder to place as a moth. So depending on what you're resting on, it might be pretty effective. So, is one enjoying a raspberry? So that just gives you just a taste of what we have in Minnesota. So hopefully you're convinced that, moths, they're pretty cool. There's a lot of shapes and sizes and colors. And even the ones that are brown are still pretty nice. So a lot of people then want to know, well, how do I identify moths? So what I like to tell people, set your expectations accordingly. I've been working on them since age 5. I'm now going on 42. It's still a steep learning curve. Point is, there are some groups that are very difficult that you pretty much need to dedicate your life to them to have a handle on them, and maybe not even then. But then there's others that are very easy, like the Luna moths. So I look at it as it's a vast sea of unknown, and then maybe slowly you start learning things out of that vast sea. But the best way is get to know other moth people and find community there, because that will help you on this voyage, so you're not cast adrift wondering what is going on. I did mention before, to kind of help you navigate these waters, the Peterson Field Guide to Moths is pretty recent, and it has moths in their live resting posture that, for most of you, are likely to take pictures. This is more what they're going to look like. And northeastern North America, so that should serve you pretty well. This is a little more specific, but doesn't cover as many species, but again, most of these will be in northern Minnesota. For those that really want to delve into the scientific exploration, there are technical references out there, but this would be if you really want to do deep dive. How many have heard of this website? Moth Photographers Group. This has most of the North American species illustrated, and it's pretty fun. You can browse color plates of either pinned or live images, and it just gives you a sense of the diversity. And again, it can be pretty overwhelming, but you can also filter it for the upper Midwest or Minnesota if you'd like. And then I'd probably recommend something like, how many of you use iNaturalist? Fair number. So this is a way, okay, you take that picture, you can put it on there and let others help you identify, because there's a lot of specialists that will be watching this website. So, and then Bug Guide is another one. I don't know if I put that on there. Bug Guide and iNaturalist, I'd say, would be the two best, where it's a place to reach out to others, you might even find others in your area that are interested in moths, and just help each other identify these, because it can be very daunting. And then more local references. This is one I helped co-author, a checklist of Wisconsin moths. I'll come back to this in a moment when I talk about the Minnesota Biological Survey, because we currently do not have such a list for Minnesota yet. So, how do we find moths? How do we do that? Just go and have a lot of fun. It's not too hard, folks. So, that's pretty much what I do all. There's a lot of different, so during the day you can go out and chase things. A net is a common technique. Well, you could be creative, so there's a long handle on that to get up on some willow catkins. And as I mentioned before, there can be certain things that, you gotta look at a certain flower at a certain time of year. Here's another one that's only out in the day, and it's very fast moving. You gotta look on certain flowers to find it. Or again, maybe check those flowers at night and you'll find other species. So just going out with a headlamp or a net or your camera, you can find a lot without any special equipment. Also, damp, sandy roads. How many of you have noticed butterflies on forest roads driving around? So in here we have, butterflies, but then there are non-butterfly moths there. There are other moths that will do that, and even at night, occasionally. But if you want to see a lot of moths quickly, the best techniques are artificial lights. So the one on the left is ultraviolet light. So the type of light does matter. It's more like a yellowish light, like a street light. Sodium vapor does not attract very well. Insect vision is skewed to the ultraviolet end. So those blue wavelengths, like a bug zapper typically would draw on a lot of things, or a mercury vapor shop light. So here's a mercury vapor light on a good night. This is in, I think, Chik-Wauk County, Minnesota. And this night had over 200 species of moths, and literally thousands and thousands of individuals. So I do have that light with me. The weather conditions will not yield that tonight, but if you get the right conditions and good habitat, it can be truly amazing what's out there. Here's some other different setups. Some folks at the Saxon Bog. So there's all different kinds of interesting moth lights. This is a portable trap that I use to survey remote habitats. This is out in Red Lake, Peatland, in the middle of nowhere. In addition to lights, you see this slimy stuff here on a branch. That's rotten banana and brown sugar. Maybe put some of that up tonight as well. That can draw in other species that don't come to light well. And here's when it's working well. You can see on these branches, moth, 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 moth. Even in the distance, the eye shine is kind of coppery and it's captured by the camera flash. A headlamp will also pick this up. This is at Minnesota Point, Duluth. There's one of those underwing moths down there. One we'd have up here. So I was just up the Sawville Trail. Bait was not working really well. It was drying in some stuff, but it's not quite going to be like this. And again, weather is part of it too. A nice warm night with maybe a little breeze to get that center. Then you can be creative how you want to put your banana. And then some other special techniques. These are pheromone traps that draw in some of the wasp mimic moths. So there's some moths that don't come, they fly during the day, but you're not likely to see them. They don't come to light, they don't come to bait. So there's just some weird things you got to use special techniques to find. For where you don't have night, this is up in Alaska. A Malays trap can catch things that are just flying through, but I have not used these in Minnesota, but this would be a good way to catch things that fly at night that don't like bait or lights. And you don't have to wait till the season gets warm. So middle of winter, you can look under tree bark and there are things to be found. So these are some species that overwinter as adults. Every New Year's I do a New Year's Day moth hunt. I think for the last 15 years or so. We usually get 5 to 10 species on average. And here's gathering leaf litter. Some of the earlier attempts, this is in a hotel room for entomologist gathering. We didn't get any moths out of that one. A lot of spiders came out. Maybe it helped control the bed bugs, who knows. But I eventually did that in my backyard, and I did get some moths out. This is Morrison sallow. This is the most, if you see a moth flying in your headlights in January, this is the most likely culprit. And here's one that dropped off a baited tree onto the snow. So again, these are pretty extreme season species. And just to show more extreme, since we have probably winter folk in this room, Red Lake Peatland, north of Waskish. Again, that doesn't look like it does not bode well for finding moths, but little leather leaf poking out of the snow, and yeah, there are probably like 50 of these just zooming around. Wow! Yes, wow. And in the north, you can get where, like this is April in Lake of the Woods County, where it's just starting to melt, still a lot of snow, and there's some really special things that come out. This is a black and white one. It's often called the scarce infant, and only flies during the day, really hard to find, but if the snow's gone, you're too late. Wow. And as I mentioned before, you don't just have to look, I'm mostly showing pictures of adult moths, but you can look for the caterpillars too. So again, look at leaves for strange shapes, reminders, or leaf rolls. Or if you have wilted plants, like, why is it wilted? Sometimes there's a caterpillar boring inside. And then also different habitats. So deciduous forests are going to have, very different mixes of species. Whoops, whoa, I'm a little too fast. Then something like prairies. This would be southwestern Minnesota. So a lot of these species you're not going to have in Cook County. Well, none of them, rather. Just to give you a sense there. So habitat matters. Bogs and fens, some of my favorite habitats. You get a lot of really interesting species there. And this one on Labrador Tea. This one will be out in some of the bogs along the Gunflint. This one's a little harder to find. Freya. St. Lawrence tiger moth, that's a big showy one. This one bores into pitcher plants, so an insect that eats an insect-eating plant.
How big is that?
Probably about an inch long, plus or minus. And you can see it on the, it's a smaller picture then somehow. So, and briefly mention my work with the Minnesota Biological Survey and this whole lifestyle adventure of chasing moths. So my goals with the survey, I first started in 2009, and actually before that I did an internship up at Norris Camp in Lake of the Woods County, and that led to my job with the survey, and we started 2009 in Cook County actually, and been doing work ever since. So I'm trying to address what moths occur in Minnesota. As I said before, there's no state checklist. Where do they occur? What parts of the state? But also what habitats, and then what are their natural histories, as much as we can figure out, and what plants are they using, and then are there species of conservation concern. So again, trying to survey all habitats and regions of Minnesota, so the eastern broadleaf forest, the prairies, the aspen parklands in the northwest, and the Laurentian mixed forest, so the more boreal zone of the northeast. So covering all parts of the state. So often looking for rare species, but documenting everything along the way. So Regal fritillaria is one of those. So sometimes it's rare things that are already we know pretty well. Other times it's stuff that has never been found before. This is a cactus boring one that was a new state record just a couple years ago. Here's 4 more, just completely new records for the state. The one in the top right, the only other time I've seen it, they were common in the south of Fairbanks, Alaska. It's listed as a threatened species in Finland. There's hardly anything known about it. I got 2 on the Echo Trail north of Ely. I think right between where the fires are. So I don't know if it's there anymore, but hasn't been seen since. So there's certainly just no so little about. This was kind of an exciting find. This was known from only 7 specimens to science, and started with a guy on horseback in the early 1900s, and a boat anchored off of Beaver Island, Michigan, and then it went 60 years and no one saw one. It showed up on Manitoulin Island, Ontario. Eventually got it and found it's actually in fens, and people have been looking at the wrong habitat. So since seen hundreds, and did this publication on it. So sometimes something seems so rare because nobody's looking in the right habitats. Now it is still a pretty uncommon thing, and the habitat is not a lot of it in Minnesota until you get to the northwest. But there's discoveries to be made. And new species to science. I have no idea what this thing is. This is a new genus, new species. That'll be a future project. And then right now I'm working with a Canadian colleague on naming 2 new species of tiger moths. This one is very common in the bogs in northwestern Minnesota, like the red-legged peatland. Looks like that. So it's a pretty colorful moth, and yet doesn't have a name yet. And there's its home. So here's with Chris Schmidt at the Canadian National Collection. We're trying to, often a new species, it's not like you catch it and, oh, it's a new species. It's like, maybe, and then you start looking at specimens like, that doesn't make sense. Sometimes it takes a lot of work and just looking through a lot of confusing things until, aha, I see a pattern. And this one took, I think I first found the thing in 2007, and I thought I had figured out, and then now I just felt confused. So from 2007 until now to really understand what's going on. So can you separate those into 2 things? So as I mentioned before, here's a Wisconsin checklist of moths, and this actually does not include the micro moths. So by next year, June, I'm supposed to have a preliminary checklist out for Minnesota moths. So as I said, my personal list is over 2,100. I don't know what the end total is going to be. I'm hoping it'll get at least close to 2,400, which I think Michigan's official published checklist is about that. And Wisconsin, again, doesn't have the micros included, so the macros are 1,284. So we'll see, but stay tuned. And then finally, we'll just talk briefly about conservation concerns and actions. So some of you probably heard a lot of negative news about insects. Some's even hitting mainstream publications, have maybe heard the term insect apocalypse. So just numbers, abundances overall seem to be going down. Again, caveats to that, like a lot of things, it's more complicated. There's some areas things are doing well, others not so well. And it might be, and populations fluctuate a lot year to year, but the general consensus among all my colleagues is, yeah, things are not as good as they used to be. And there's some species like this Otoi skipper that, this is probably not even in Minnesota anymore, as far as we know. It may be extirpated. It's vanished from most of its range. A lot of other prairie species are in similar straits. You may have heard of Powashik skipper or Dakota skipper that are federally listed. But as I said, there still are pockets of the state, especially in the north, where there's large wide landscapes, that there still is a lot of life. A lot of biomass, a lot of biodiversity there. Now, I don't know what running a light 50 years ago would have been like there, because nobody had done it. But maybe this is already reduced. We just don't know. But at least there still is a lot out there. This is more relevant for the prairie region, but it could apply to some management in Cook County. There's some barrens like Pluff Creek, if you've heard of that place up the Sawmill. The use of fire and habitats. Of course, big landscapes like here, you have wildfires and that. There's always going to be some bit unburned that things can come back to. In the prairies, that's not always the case. So here's carefully leaving this section unburned so that it can recolonize other parts of the burned prairie over here. And here's one skipper that would benefit from that. And then also could be actions like prairie restorations and things can bring species back. Some of the stem-boring moths readily take to it. But I want to end with, here's something we could all do. This is my home when I bought it in northeast Wisconsin. Notice the yard, manicured lawn. And thankfully they didn't herbicide for violets. They did the year before. But since then, I've rewilded it nicely. So my yard list for moths is about 900 species and adding more all the time. So now not everyone's in a situation that they can do this, but the more natives you can put, the better. The less herbicides, the better. And when you pick plants, go native as much as you can. Consider, flowers that maybe cover the entire season as much as possible. Just if you only have September flowers, then it might be kind of hard for things earlier in the summer, etc. And also think of the time saved not mowing that lawn. I side some paths through it, and that's about it. So a lot of time to do other things. So. But I'd say probably the most important thing is to foster appreciation for the natural world and natural history. So as many of you are probably well aware, especially with younger folks, just interest and enthusiasm in the natural world. It's kind of hard to compete with electronics and things, but we're not going to be able to, in the end, protect things if people do not care about it. So whatever you can do to foster that curiosity and engage people's passions. So. And with that, I'll take your questions.
Thank you.
Yes.
Could you talk about the hummingbird moth a little bit? That's one of my favorite moths, but I've never seen it.
Sure. So there's a number of things that go by the name of hummingbird moths. They're all in the sphinx moth family. And they kind of have cigar-shaped bodies and very rapid wing beats. So there's some that have more like 2.5, 3 inches across. They have clear patches on the wings. Like one is called the hummingbird clear. But they're noticeably, they're not as big as hummingbirds. But they fly during the day. They have clear patches. There's 4 different kinds in Minnesota. And those you're likely to see, they could be on blueberry flowers. But I think one of the best actually is if you have lilacs planted. That's actually pretty good for attracting those. But there's a lot of native flowers that will attract them as well. And usually, like June is a really good month for, like there's one that's on, I think it's bush honeysuckle, Diervilla renicera, which is a common shrub in the northern region. So yeah, June is probably the best month to see them, at least in Cook County. But there's another one called the white line sphinx, and there's a few other related things. They're a little bigger, and they often fly like late evening, dusk at flowers, and they're more the size of a hummingbird. A lot of people call those hummingbirds. And those aren't so common here. They kind of wander up from the south. But again, whatever, I'm trying to think, the evening primrose is a good flower for some of those bouncing bats. Yeah, it's just trying a bunch of different flowers. But those clear wing ones are probably the ones you're most likely to see. And then there's a smaller one that actually looks like a big fuzzy bumblebee. Yes?
So the bear trap fire is about 30,000 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any survivors in a fire like that?
Good question. So within that 30,000 acres, I'm guessing there are probably a few skips where there's a little bit of trees or brush or something that the fire actually didn't consume. Within that, things definitely can survive. If it's just scorched earth, black, there are some things that can actually be underground, as a caterpillar or something, that if the fire moves over the top fast enough, they might survive. Yeah, I mean, if it's really, really cooked, unless they're deep down, it's probably just assumed not much is going to survive there. However, they have wings as adults, and they're usually pretty rapid to recolonize an area if the habitat is back. So after a fire, it depends what habitat they're looking for. So if it's something, let's say it likes a shady black spruce swamp and that burns over, that might be a long time before that comes back to a state where it can use it. Some species, like in the rock outcrops here, there's actually a skipper I'm hoping to see maybe tomorrow that it likes like poverty grass and openings in the jack pine on the rock outcrops. That's something that will probably be pretty happy within maybe 4 to 5 years. The habitat's looking pretty nice and it can come back in. It really depends on the species and also the landscape. So the nice thing about here, it may be a 30,000 acre fire, but there's a lot more than 30,000 acres around it to fill it in. Now imagine if this room is just a huge agricultural landscape, and that projector is your preserve, and you burn 100% of that. Where's it coming back from? And that's when it comes to prairies and isolated habitats, you have to be a lot more cautious with managing habitats. And even if you burn half of it, that's at least giving things a chance. But it can be slow for things to recolonize if there's not a big source to start with. I have surveyed some wildfires in northwestern Minnesota. There was a Paulsburg fire, and I think that was like 2016 or something. The next year, it was amazing how much was filling in because it's surrounded by a big wild landscape. So for the bear trap fire, I don't have any initial concerns. I don't also have any historical data from there to know. If there was a unique habitat that was really isolated, then it may have wiped out something that's going to have a really hard time getting back. But I think most of the things will probably be fine. Yes.
So the life cycle of moths, I have been reading that they could have several in a season versus one long. And then they overwinter, and then it's just like, so within how many species kind of both?
Yeah, well, they do all different things. There's so many species, and some, like you said, well, there's some that just only have one generation a year. And what stage spends the winter? It could be the egg, it could be the caterpillar, it could be the pupa, and sometimes it can be the adult. Then there's some that could have 2 or 3, or sometimes even more. Especially when you get to southern Minnesota with a longer growing season, you can get more generations. But there's even things in Cook County that can have 3 generations. Quite a few things that have 2. And then you have some of the boreal things and like some of our bog species. There's one called the Utah Arctic. It takes 2 years to go through its whole life cycle. And we have a few other things. There's carpenter moths that might be 3 to 4 years. They bore into wood. And then there's some famous, in the Arctic, one called the Arctic woolly bear that can be like, it's like 10 or 12 or something. It just basically comes out of the snow and ice to feed for a few weeks and then back to winter. So at least at the most extreme latitudes. So yeah, they do all different things.
You talked about the sphinx moths moving. Is there any migration or whatever like that for some of the moths?
Yeah, so good question. So most of the Minnesota moth fauna are probably residents in the general area. So you might have something that is a resident, say, so I'm going to differentiate between, I would just say, a dispersing individual versus an actual migratory strain. So to me, a disperser would be, it's living in the bog down there, but it might wander through here. Yeah, this isn't its home, but it's in the local area. Then there's species that are, take the monarch would be your most famous example of something migratory. They do not survive, they cannot survive the whole year in Minnesota. They have to come back from the south. But it's a very predictable, well, for now, unfortunately. It's may change in the future. But, it's a regular migrant. It has a regular migratory path. We have other species that are regularly coming up from the south. It's not as organized of a migration as the monarch. And then you have just call a stray as a more irregular occurrence of, maybe a hurricane, something follows the wind up and we get things, oh, this is something from the Gulf Coast. And that happens. And when you're out a lot, in a given season, I'm usually likely to see a few things like this came from several states away. We had some super hot weather in southwestern Minnesota back in April, and I caught some things like, this is like Kansas or something. So what is this doing here? So yeah, sometimes you get really weird things like that. So during hurricane seasons, and if there's really warm winds coming out of the south, that'll bring for like somewhere on the North Shore, actually because Lake Superior is kind of a dispersal barrier. Some of those weird southern things, they hit Lake Superior and kind of follow that. So like Grand Marais would actually be a decent place to run into. It's like one spent enough test.
Sorry, what's a dispersal barrier?
Oh, so basically something that keeps it from moving. So a large enough body of water. For something that doesn't have there's some things that could fly all the way across Lake Superior, would have the strength to do that if the wind currents are right. But others, it's like, that's a long ways to go. So they might get to the edge of the water and then follow the coast. So something like a very large body of water. It could be a high mountain range. And then there could just be movement corridors, like the Mississippi River, sometimes just following a natural corridor.
You must see some unusual mating behavior. They have, obviously, the pheromones, but are there any acoustics or dances that you've seen with some of the moths?
Well, there's all kinds of displays in some territorial behaviors. So. And of course, butterflies being day flying have a lot of that. But some of the day flying moths typically have been more elaborate. There's it's a fireweed feeding. It's black and has big white spots, and it's actually common in Cook County. And they'll perch in openings and they'll zoom around and they'll fight other males and then wait for the females to come in. So a lot of them do territorial displays and can be pretty aggressive to other individuals. The courtship themselves, I mean, some things have interesting dances and things like that. Yeah, a lot of the nocturnal stuff is really hard to observe. So most species we actually just don't know. But then sound, it's typically some of the tiger moths that are well known for making clicking sounds. It's more for defense than it is for courtship. So for like basically jamming, like radar jammer against bats.
Yeah. So besides the monarch, what other nymphalids migrate, truly migrate?
So that have a pretty consistent migration. Red Admiral would be one. Painted Lady would be another. There's some that are more debatable, but I think even like common sulfurs, they typically show up in their warren. So some of our most common butterflies, we actually don't have a great handle on what are they actually doing. But yeah, the admirals would be the most consistent.
What about black swallows now?
They'd be resident. Here they would be, boy, they would be rare in Cook County though. This is just getting a bit far north for them. Although they've moved into like international falls and they're following the invasive parsnip on roadsides. So, I mean, I don't care for that plant at all, but I guess at least one positive, maybe the black swallowtails will come along with it.
Do you have, when you're doing your surveys, do you have a standard protocol that you do at every site you go to? You like sample with certain techniques or a certain time that you're out, or is there anything like that, or do you just kind of do whatever you want to, like, you know what I mean?
Kind of a mix of the two, because surveying is often, to get good results, it's highly weather dependent. And so I will adjust techniques and approach based on the weather. But in general, when I'm doing, let's say like a sheet survey or a bait survey, so I have particular techniques, and I am documenting all the species I encounter. Ideally, sometimes I'll modify that when I have too much specimen backlog, but the point of that is then there is a solid record of everything that was there. I can make claims about what wasn't there. Because if someone's just saying, oh, I'm just going to note the really cool things, well, in 50 years, you know, what was common is now rare. It's like, boy, I wish I had taken notes on that. So I can look at the whole community and at least maybe get a glimpse at how that's changing. It's difficult because it varies so much, and then, you know, if we came back here in 2 weeks, it's a different set of species. It's constantly changing throughout the season. But yeah, the methods, I'm pretty consistent in for each technique and how I do it. But what techniques I employ in a place like this, all right, it's going to be a cold, clear night. I probably want to be on a hilltop, so it's warmer with some canopy cover. So I might adjust the habitats. I wouldn't want to be in like some of you have the boardwalk through the shrubby fen there. That in the middle of that would be a bad choice. So I would adjust protocol based. I would not do that because of the weather. So, and then if I'm doing, sometimes I'll do just a casual, like a field trip outing. I might not be as persnickety where it's more about the educational part. And then sometimes I'll do a select survey way because I'm so overwhelmed with data processing. I'm only going to note rare things from here. I occasionally do that as well. But yeah, I do have different protocols and I know what those are.
Well, I'm sure Kyle will definitely, we can wrap up the program here because we're a little over time, but I'm sure Kyle would be more than happy to hang out and answer more questions if you folks are interested. But let's give him another round of applause.
Before you leave, a quick show of hands, because I'm debating on what to do tonight with the weather. Is there anyone that's interested in sticking around after dark? Because it is going to be a colder night, so it won't be as diverse. There still will be moths, but it won't be amazing. Who's potentially planning on sticking around? I'd be happy to stay, especially when we meet younger people. So in that case, let me make sure that I touch base with me so that I think the gates close at 5. Yes. Where I think it'd be easiest if we just park outside the gate, and I will figure out where to put the light and the bait. And at least you get to see the techniques. We'll probably see a few moths. So we'll get to see some stuff and maybe some other cool creatures at night. So good for you.
Yeah.